All right, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Hey, it is 3:02, so we are, I'm sorry, 15:02 for all of my. Yeah. Uh, yes, if everybody go ahead and take your seats, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Defense and Veteran Affairs Committee, our first meeting of this session. I appreciate everybody being here in attendance. I have asked Representative Ballard to say our invocation this afternoon. Representative Ballard.
Thank you. If you will bow with me, please. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for your guidance, your wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. Help us to engage in meaningful conversation that does your will. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. Well, again, good afternoon. I appreciate all of y'all being here. We've got two items on the agenda today, and we're going to start first with our presentation from our folks from Augusta. And I have asked Chairman Prince to introduce the group and just give us just tell us a little bit about what we're going to be hearing today.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and committee members. Thank you for your time and attention today. Today we're going to have a group there. They're based out of Augusta. And of course, we're veterans. They're veterans, just like I am and many of you. But they, about 5 years ago, at least five, probably a little longer than that, they started an effort to try to get a veteran cemetery located in and around the Augusta area. And they've made a lot of progress, both at the local level. You see our mayor here today. They support it at the state level. About 3 years ago, we as a House and the Senate, we put about over $1 million towards the starting of this, the design and development piece. However, since that time, we've hit a couple of roadblocks because this is a federal issue, getting them to come in with the funds, the matching funds. So what we have today is a couple of the veterans group. I call it the Veterans CSRA Alliance from Augusta, because it's not just an Augusta thing, and that's why they're here, to let you know that this is larger than Augusta. This is actually larger than the state of Georgia, because veterans can come from, veteran is a veteran. So, but they want to come and present some of the things that they've done, where they're going, and how they may need our help as they move forward. So without further ado, I want to introduce Mr. Don Clark. I think he's going to come up, and our Mayor Garnett Johnson, and they're going to talk to us briefly on what's going on. And as you can see, they have a crowd with them today. Now, most of them are from Augusta, so and thank you guys for coming up and showing your support for this. And Mr. Chairman, I will turn it over to our mayor.
Thank you, Chairman Prince. And again, appreciate y'all being here, and we'll open your mic.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, members of the Georgia General Assembly. My name is Mayor Garnett Johnson. It gives me great honor to be the 85th mayor for the city of Augusta, to be before you today with a very distinguished group of Americans, Georgians and Augustans, that are here for a special ask. As Representative Prince mentioned earlier, there were some appropriations made for the creation of a veteran cemetery in Augusta, Georgia, at some state property. Property has been allocated. Some funding has been allocated. However, today we're here to try to ask for appropriations to finish that process. The group behind me represents a very diverse group of Augustans that serve this country honorably. Augusta, as you know, is the home of Fort Eisenhower, former Fort Gordon. A lot of retirees, very strong military population. So I would ask that you would consider this ask and this offer. Consider supporting these ladies and women behind me. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Don Clark, who's going to give you some specifics behind the ask, because this is a very, very, very tall ask. However, we feel deservingly that Augusta is deserving of this veteran cemetery, and we're excited about the opportunity to present to you today. So thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and committee.
Hey, thank you, Mayor. If at some point I think it you may be getting to this, but I think it'd be good for this committee to get some background and some perspective on this, because, you know, some of our members may be aware generally, but this will be the first time this committee has heard anything about this issue, so that'd be great. Thank you.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone. Let me back this mic up a little bit. First of all, thank you all for your leadership and taking the time to for us to come before you. My name is Don Clark. I am a Army retiree. I served in the United States Army in 3 combat tours, and was fortunate and blessed enough to come back unscathed and still motivated enough to continue serving throughout the community and bringing a message before you today. The men and women behind me represent eras from Korean War, Vietnam War, even forgotten services such as the WAC Corps, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, and otherwise. Collectively, we have 675 years of service sitting behind here in front of you today. But we have even more of that in the Augusta area. Proud men and women that have served the country, provided the sacrifice, and are coming before you today with a clear ask. To give you a little background about where this was established, in 2019, myself and the co-chair for this initiative, former Mayor Bob Young, presented. Am I too close? Is that why it keeps going in and out? It's just the way it is? All right. Okay. 2019, we've made a proposal to our community based on the fact that in the Augusta area, we have 2 locations close to, in proximity to us. And there's, I would say, close very, very loosely. The 2 areas for a veteran cemetery for members to be buried are in Columbia, South Carolina, and Milledgeville, Georgia. Both of those are over 90 miles one way. The issue became very apparent that we needed to try to make a request to the state to establish better accommodations for a veteran cemetery to be located closer in proximity. With the growth of Fort Eisenhower, the relocation of the Army Cyber Command, and for the Georgia NSA, our area is booming when it comes to service members and when it comes even more so to veterans and their families. We made that proposal in 2019. Overwhelming amount of support from the community came forth to resonate in full support and agreement of this proposal. Once we received an overwhelming amount of letters of support and otherwise, we carried our message to make a request through our legislators' assistance to make the proposal directly to the governor. We were informed that the governor had to make approval for the installation of a new cemetery. Of course, you all know we have 2 existing state veteran cemeteries. That's Glenville and Milledgeville. So for us to ask for a cemetery to be located in Augusta, we had to make that proposal to the governor. We made that proposal to the governor with also a proposed site selected. So with everything that we had amassed and received, we took that proposal to the governor. The governor weighed in on his unanimous support of establishing another cemetery in the state of Georgia, which, if this was to happen, would be the 3rd cemetery in Georgia. From that point, we corresponded with State Properties Commission so that they can engage the 2 directorates who own the property. In that regard, we initially thought it was only one, and we found out quickly that there were 2 directorates that we found out that owned it: Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Georgia Forestry. When those 2 entities came together, they approved releasing the property for the project. At that point, the legislation received the request for the $1 million. Now let me explain the $1 million. For us to make a submission for a request for funds for the installation, establishment, or even expansion of a veteran cemetery, that goes before a fund called the VA Grant Fund Program. For us to submit an application, and let me clarify who us is. us, meaning Georgia Department of Veteran Services, would have to submit that application on our behalf in support of the request. Because this would be a state cemetery, they would manage it, they would essentially own and run the cemetery for the state. But for that submission to happen, the legislation had to approve $1 million, which was earnest money. At that time, the project was estimated at $10 million, so the state had to give $1 million earnest money to go with and forward for the application. That was submitted, it went forward, and you all that were here unanimously through the House and the Senate agreed for that $1 million in support of the project, and we moved forward to the next process. That next process, of course, we quickly found out was very complicated. The VA Grant Fund Program is the vehicle that any city in the United States applies for funding, either for expansion or for establishment or installation of a new cemetery. It's broken down categorically. Category 1 is for an existing cemetery to request funds for expansion. Category 2 is what we fell in, which was to request funds for the installation and establishment of a new cemetery. Once we made that initial submission of the application, once the state legislators came together unanimously to grant that $1 million, we went through the process. That first year we found out our placement on the categorization list. I think it was 22. The problem became quickly apparent to us. We fell on number 22, but the fund itself only had enough funding for maybe the top 8 or 10 at that time. Now, the way the process works is when you make a submission, and if you don't make the prioritization funding, then you resubmit your application for the following year. We've done that for 3 years. And every year that we've resubmitted the application, and again, I say we, but Georgia Department of Veteran Services has resubmitted that application, we've fallen lower and lower on the prioritization list. So during that entire time, myself and Bob began to reach out to our leadership at the federal level to request and ask for any level of direct appropriation to be assigned, since we saw that this program was so grossly underfunded. We quickly found out through the due diligence of Senator Warnock, Senator Ossoff's office, of Congressman Allen and others, that there were no direct levels of appropriation that could be assigned or established in support of a cemetery. The only vehicle that we found out, and this has been conveyed to us by numerous entities, the VA, the senators, and the House of Representatives, that the only vehicle at the federal level that's established for funding source is through that VA Grant Fund Program. So I've laid out the fact that the thing is grossly underfunded, and that each year we've applied and we've made the priority list, but our categorization has dropped each year. This year's category list came out in September of last year, and we were number 35. So bottom line, our point at that point, after 3 years of submitting this, was the realization, if we have to depend on that, it won't happen. So in that regard, we weighed the options, we weighed everything that was in front of us. We talked to our local delegation members. We also talked to our federal leaders. And that's what's bringing us before the state now to reposition our ask of requesting for the funding to establish the cemetery to come from the state. That would cover the initial costs to build and establish the cemetery. And also, we received verification and validation from the VA that any interments, and this is for any cemetery, state or national, any interments, there is a reimbursement that a state receives from that. So any burials that happen in a state or a national cemetery, the state will receive reimbursement for that. The question we had, and we wanted to make sure before we posed the ask to the state, was if the state covered the initial cost of establishing the cemetery, would we negate the reimbursements that we will receive for interments? And we received written documentation and verification from the VA that that would not disrupt that process. So the part that we're at this point in time is requesting the state to cover. Now, the initial process started at $10 million. With inflation and everything going up, the number had to be bumped to the $12 million costs that we're requesting from the state. So what we're asking is for the Senate and the House to consider definitely the ask that we're making to receive the funding so that the men and women of the Augusta region have a suitable location within reasonable distance. But more importantly, we have a place that our community, that our men and women that have served their country can have a beautiful, serene, peaceful location for their final resting place. And I'd like to further add, out of all the installations that are positioned in Georgia, we are the only installation that doesn't have one in closer proximity. And I challenge each of you to do some due diligence and make sure and vet what I'm saying. Not questioning anyone or anything, but there's a lot of questions about a lot of the particulars with this, and I wanted to make sure and be as clear and succinct as I could when it comes to the details.
Thank you. We do have a few questions. Chairman Saines, do you have a question?
Thank you for that very clarifying testimony, and thank you to all the veterans who've come out today. I have the great fortune of representing Naval Submarine Base Kings Bay, and I know that appreciate the costs you all have paid for us. In terms of the mention of the internment reimbursement, I'm guessing that equates to the operational cost of operating the center. Is there kind of a rate structure? Would it be anticipated to be neutral in terms of the annual operating cost from the state, or in terms of that? Because I know we treat it differently if it's a one-time investment or an annual one.
Okay, so I'm going to answer this, both of the questions that you had. So Georgia Department of Veteran Services, again, would be the entity that would manage the cemetery. Currently, it's estimated for the two cemeteries that they have at between $550,000, $600,000 annually to manage and operate an existing cemetery. We just spoke with Commissioner Ross and the board today. They would base the model of our cemetery off of Milledgeville, because from a size component, that would be the one that they would base their proximity, their specifications off of. State Properties, I forgot to mention this, State Properties has set aside 200 plus acres for our cemetery. So it would be the largest in the state as well.
I appreciate it. And just one quick follow-up, if you don't mind. You mentioned that we're in Category 2 because it wasn't a already constructed center.
Correct.
And that if the Georgia went ahead and led in actually building it, we would be under Category 1.
Right.
For it, in terms of the placement, are most Category 1s within and this might not be something we can follow up later, but are most Category 1s under the priority of funding within the top 10, or are there?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. And like I said, it depends, because each year, every city makes a different ask for expansions, and you really can't gauge that. There's no vehicle to really gauge that. If a city feels they need additional funding for expansion, then they submit, and then that kind of teeters the prioritization list. But you made a good point, and I want to make sure and clarify something. If we, as the state of Georgia, creates or provides the funding to establish a cemetery, then yes, that moves us to Category 1. And for any expansion funds, then we would be better positioned to apply through the federal government for receiving funding. if that makes sense to everyone. Perfect example, Milledgeville and Glenville are both on the prioritization list for expansion funds. And just so you all understand, our veterans and veterans in our region are having to go to Milledgeville, which is why that cemetery itself is quickly meeting its capacity and threshold, because we don't have a balance in that, to really kind of take some of the pressure from that cemetery.
Thank you. Representative Jackson, any question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I would like to say thank you to all the veterans here. As a military veteran myself, serving 22 years in the United States Navy, I appreciate you, but I also want to extend that to the families, because we keep forgetting that veterans have families, and we want to make sure that they too have a final resting place if they decide to be with their loved ones, even after death. Appreciate the presentation, and you answered a couple of questions based on what my colleague asked. But let me ask it this way: that $12 million initial cost,
Yes, sir.
200 acres,
Mhm.
right? Will this plot or this area also have room for expansion as well?
Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing that's tied to this location that we found. So the initial construction would not encompass the entire 200 acres. The initial construction would encompass about 50 to 60 acres. Now, that initial cost, so that everyone understands, is not just to establish plots. The initial cost that is established to create and construct a new cemetery includes the full suite of buildings, facilities, items to run and operate. And that's a chapel, a columbarium, admin building, maintenance building, the maintenance equipment, and so on. All of those things that Georgia Department of Veterans Services has as a cookie cutter approach of how they position and establish their cemeteries is what will be included in that, along with the initial plots.
Okay, I appreciate that. So when you mentioned the maintenance cost is anywhere between 500 to 600K annually, is that based on that 50 to 60 acres?
No, sir. The 500 to 600K are the operating costs.
Okay.
Those are the annual operating costs for our cemetery.
Based on the other two. Based on the other two that
Yes,
are
sir.
already in existence.
Yes, sir.
My final question, Mr. Chairman, is this: in terms of appropriation, because this will be a federal state thing. What were the appropriations for the other two? Because it seems like we already know how to do this, right?
Right.
Arlington been around forever.
Right.
Other cemeteries for veterans been around forever.
Correct.
It just seemed like this process is a little bit nebulous.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that. So the two existing cemeteries, the property that they sit on were donated property. So those two cemeteries, Glenville and Milledgeville, were donated by families that wanted to give the property towards this specific use. Now, you'll definitely have to follow up with Georgia Department of Veterans Services just to verify and validate the funding source that they went through. I don't want to misspeak on that, and I definitely don't want to overstep the fact that Bob and I have been heavily involved in this, but Georgia Department of Veterans Services will be your absolute truth and source of a lot of the things that I'm sharing with you today. So I please ask you all to check with Commissioner Ross and verify and validate what I'm saying as well.
Thank you. All right, Representative Cannon, you have a question?
Yes, Chairman Bonner, thank you. Does the 12 million include the cost of the land, or is that
No, and that's the beauty of this, Representative. It's state property. So that was a challenge we had even starting out with this. Number one, we had to find property that was suitable for the project. Didn't have wetlands, marshlands, and so on. But we also had the challenge of trying to find property that was owned by the state. In this case, we did. We found both. We found property that was suitable to receive burials and otherwise. We also found property that was owned by the state. And that's what I had spoke about earlier, the two directorates, Georgia Department of Forestry and Department of Behavioral Health came to agreement to release that property for the cemetery.
Last question, who would kind of manage the development, design, construction, all that of the project? And since it's taxpayer money, we make sure that 12 million is spent very effectively and efficiently.
Yes, sir. And the beauty that's tied to this as well, the existing, there's an architect firm called 2KM Architects. They are located in Augusta, Georgia. They designed, prepared land assessments, everything for the existing two cemeteries that we have in our inventory today. 2KM Architect, along with Georgia Department of Veteran Services, have been the two entities that have been our technical advisors throughout this entire process. So there was nothing that we've ever established from a rendering towards a identification of property or suitability that didn't include those two entities. 2KM Architect, again, would be that subject matter expert in that regard because they've planned, designed all of our existing state cemeteries.
Thank you, Chairman Byron. Go on.
Did you say go Army, be Navy? Just wanted to make sure the group heard that.
And Representative Gladney, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you very much, Mr. Clark, and to former Mayor Bob Young, who did the heavy lift on this work before I came into this project. Thank you so much for all the veterans who traveled all this way to present this to us. I'm very, very proud that this particular project is in the heart of my district. All 200 and some odd acres would be in my district, and would love to have this here in tribute to the veterans that serve this state. And again, I am thankful to Mayor Johnson and all of your continued work in the efforts to this. Mind you, I am coming into this project after you have already done your heavy lift, so forgive me if I ask a question that may have preceded my understanding of what is taking place. One of the things I wanted to say is that, so I have had an experience with a constituent who I did a posthumous Outstanding Georgian Award for a service member who was a Command Sergeant Major. You may know Ms. Cook, who does work for the city for AARP. Her husband, Master Sergeant Cooks, passed away, and I did an award for him. We had his service in Augusta, and then she had to do his internment all the way in Fort Bragg, and then had to come back to Augusta to do his repast for the family and the rest of their loved ones and friends, which was an inconvenience that you're, talking about for all the families that have to go through that. And so if in fact she wanted to be buried with her husband, they would have to repeat that same process for her. Now, in addition to what my colleagues have already done, thank you all and the governor for what they have all graciously done in the $1 million allotment that was provided the year prior and last year. This particular ask, the way I understand it, is not a budgetary item for the state of Georgia in terms of a cemetery as well. Is that correct? It would be an extenuating ask for us too. Am I right? So we don't have a cemetery budget, so this would be something outside of that for us as a state entity. So the ask for this would be a stretch for us. That would certainly be a gracious generosity for our citizens that we would love to be able to do. However, my question is, and I think, Don, you and I, along with some of my other colleagues, we've asked this, when we talked a little bit earlier on, the congressional representation early on when they were involved with the project, and they advised us the nuances in terms of where they had avenues to get funding. And they presented that they did not in terms of the veteran cemetery project. Did they come and visit the site? Do they know where the site is? Do they know exactly in terms of their own optics what it means to our community in terms of Fort Eisenhower, that we have over 170,000 active duty military individuals that serve there, that have the opportunity to have service there, and that we are running out of room? Have they come to physically visit that site to see what the need is and the ask for this area?
Yeah, Representative Gladly, I appreciate the question. So Bob and I have never filed our vouchers for mileage, and I'm saying that in jest because we've actually executed that many levels of escorts out there, from our federal leaders to our local leaders to our local constituents who are just interested in seeing the proposed site, and even our state delegation members. He and I have committed ourselves and still commit ourselves to rendering that kind of escort out there, just like I escorted you and the mayor and others. This has been a consistent effort to ensure that everyone, like yourself and others that are newly elected, are informed, but more importantly, sometimes pictures don't really do it justice. And sometimes you actually have to get out there and actually see it for yourself. So yes, ma'am, we've taken numerous folks of leadership, influence, and otherwise out there, and we'll continue to do so until we break ground.
And then Representative Gladney, to your first part of the question, so we, under the Department of Veteran Services, there is a line item for our cemetery, so it would certainly fall under that. Even though you're partly correct in that this would be a one-time, larger than normal expense under that line item to initially fund this. So, but there is that line item under Department of Veteran Services.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you
Chairman.
for that question. Representative McCollum.
Thank you for the presentation. I want to thank everybody. I know everybody here. Thank you for your service and your long drive here. I just had one question. So the $12 million, would that do the whole project of the 200 acres? So it's 60. I apologize. I didn't hear that part.
Yeah. So the 12 million, just so everyone, and it's okay because it does get kind of confusing with all the numbers we're throwing out. The 200 plus acres is the entirety of the site.
Right.
Right. For our phase one, and what we'll do also, Representative Prince will send it to you so we can send it to the entire committee, the renderings that shows the breakdown of our phase one, phase two, and phase three. The beauty of this site that's been selected is we have generations of growth attached to it. It also will be a relief for our two existing cemeteries, which are really a lot smaller than what our site will be. According to Georgia Department of Veteran Services, and each of you should have this beautiful card that, thanks to one of our local businesses, was gracious enough to donate these to us for this reason. But 749 interments annually is what is anticipated to happen at the cemetery. That's a lot of burials.
Okay.
So,
thank you. Thank
yeah.
you. Semper Fi.
And let me clarify this too, Mr. Chairman. 749 burials, but that also means that each of those interments receives a reimbursement from the VA for each burial that happens at that cemetery. Thank you, sir, for the question.
And just to clarify, is the 12 million on top of the 1 million, or does this include the 1 million?
So, the 1 million has been, you all have graciously set that aside each year in the cycle, the funding cycle. So the ask truly is 11 million of what we're asking you to add to that 1 million that's been set aside already. But that's what the total 12 is comprised of.
Chairman Prince, last.
Yeah, and just for clarification there, Mr. Chairman, the 1 million that we got in the budget about 3 years ago, this cycle, we've had to take that not out of the budget, but out of for the veteran cemetery, because we have not had the progress that we needed from the federal government. That 1 million is still in the VA, and it's gone to mental health. However, that's why it's back to 12 million, as Mr. Clark just said.
Gotcha. Thank you for that clarification. All right. I don't see any more questions or comments from the committee. So again, I do appreciate y'all coming out. Believe me, the fact that so many of you came so far for this purpose is not lost on this committee, and it's not lost on any of the other representatives that you had any interaction with today. So I echo all of my colleagues in thanking you for being an advocate, not just for you, but for all of our brothers and sisters in arms. Commissioner Ross has repeatedly said, and I wholeheartedly agree, that the way that we treat our veterans is a national security issue, right? So that the way that we treat the veterans in this room and our brothers and sisters, it matters when we go out and try to recruit these 18 and 19-year-olds to join the service, right? So they see how we treat veterans that have served. So again, your efforts are not lost on any member of this committee or anybody else here in the Capitol. So thank y'all for coming out today, and we look forward to seeing y'all soon.
Thank you.
All right, the next item, and you guys are welcome to stick around for that. If not, I know you want to get right in that traffic. I appreciate that. Enjoy that Atlanta traffic while you can. Yes, sir. All right, we're going to go ahead and move forward with the next item of business. We've got Representative Ridley that is going to be presenting House Bill 879. And Representative, you can either sit at the table if you like, it's fine, or the podium, whatever is your preference. Podium mic, got it?
Got it.
Okay, and Representative, we are working off of LC 460708. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, the floor is yours.
So this bill came at the request of several members of the State Defense Force that are in my area, in the Cherokee County, North Cobb area. The State Defense Force is the all-volunteer version of the Guard. They fall under the Georgia National Guard. Currently, they volunteer and respond to disasters and different things that for the national. It takes time and money to activate the Guard. The State Defense Force can get there faster. They volunteer. There's some other members of the General Assembly are also members. Some of the Senate. I don't know if anybody in the House is, but these members came forward. They're volunteering all the time, but this volunteering does come at a cost. They have to pay for their expenses out of pocket. They wear an Army uniform. They have to buy that out of pocket. They travel down. Recently, they traveled down to Americus to work for Rosalind Carter's funeral down there. They were volunteering down there. They had to pay for their mileage back and forth. The state didn't reimburse them. So even though they spent all day volunteering down there, they had to pay for their food. They had to pay for their mileage. And then some of them worked more than one day, so they either had to drive back home and drive back or pay for their hotels out of pocket. So working with some of the members and then some members on this committee drafted this bill up. Lines 11 through 18 just provide a definition of eligibility, and then lines 34 and 36 provide the per diem. We talked about and put it at $25 a day as a starting point. So when they're volunteering, they're getting at least something. It's paying for their gas, it's paying for their food, because they are providing a great service for the state, and we want to appreciate them. And you know, they're putting money out of their pocket to help the state, so and all these huge budget surpluses we keep talking about if we can help the people who are helping the state. And just to clarify, in 2023, the State Defense Force volunteered 1,141 days.
All right, the board is lighting up. Let's see, Representative Williams, you'll get the first crack at it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'm just reading over this.
Thanks for asking.
Get lost, but that's she kind of accompanies me. But sorry about that. But I wasn't familiar with the bill at all, and I'm kind of reading
Yes,
over
sir.
it. I think it's just a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
You know, we're not exactly starving in Georgia, and $25 a day with the price of gas, what it is, and what McDonald's charges if you just pass through. That to me is not too good. I know how hard it is to get pay raises here if you happen to be in the legislature on defense force. So, you know, it took forever. But I'm just wondering, how'd you come up with $25 a day? I find that sometimes, and I tell folk who come before my Probation and Public Safety Committee, you know, go big or stay home and then let us adjust. But my goodness, $25 a day, I'd pay that to a high school student going out and doing state work. These folks doing important work. It's great work, and they deserve, this is not pay, but they deserve something that looks like a realistic per diem. And by the way, I wanted to pass on Representative Ridley and others that I'd like to have had an opportunity to sign this bill had I known about it. And the fact that I represent percentage-wise more veterans and active duty people than anybody in Georgia, but it's a good bill. But would like to be of help sometime. But tell me about $25 and where you got it from and who told you that.
Yes, sir. So that's in the clerk's office. If you'd like to go add your name, there's still number 6.
Don't worry about it. I don't do well at 7 and 8 and 10 after 22 years. But just tell me about the $25.
The $25 was just a starting point, talking with people to cover gas and one meal for the day, like you said. When you go to McDonald's, you're spending $11, $12, $10 in gas. It's just a starting point. If y'all would like to make it more, I don't think anyone would complain about it being higher. It was just a starting point, and these people volunteer 11, 12 days a year. So they're looking at getting $250 to $300 a year for their volunteer service to help offset these costs. Like I said, it was a starting point, and increasing it I'm not opposed to, and I don't know of anybody who was opposed to increasing it. So just trying to get started somewhere.
I understand. I'd sure recommend that we start at least at 50. Because I don't know what gas station they use, but
Yes,
we
sir.
got some rich members of the legislature, but I know some guys out there that are just doing it out of the goodness of their heart. But we ought to be able to afford $50 a day, $16 billion surplus. I don't know. I was just thinking.
Yes, sir.
All right, Representative Scott, are you 27? All right, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Williams took my whole line of questioning. I'm telling you, because I think it's a good bill, but I didn't think $25, that will only give them a quarter tank of gas. All depends on where they're coming from. So I too like Representative Williams would like to see the dollar amount change in this legislation, because I think they deserve more than $25. So you think about it, a tank of gas at the least costs about $35 to $45, and then eating at Chick-fil-A is another. Eating at Chick-fil-A another about $15. So we're thinking about $50 to $60 a day. Probably be better if we're looking to do something for these men and women. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
Thank you. Representative Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I just had one question. How much each year would it cost in total?
So as the bill's currently written on the fiscal note at $25, it would, for 2023, it would have cost $28,525 for the year. With COVID, there was a much higher use. Looking back, that was the most they've ever volunteered, and that was only at $190,000, and they were working weeks at a time straight. So, but since then, it's come back down, and for over the last 3 years, there wasn't a year that was over $35,000 if we would have been paying them the last three.
Chairman Tarvin?
Yes, most of the questions have already been addressed, but the keynote is tell who these people are mostly and what they do. I mean, they're called up in cases of emergencies and storms, and they go out and do all types of work. And the key I was asking was, I bought some old hay for my cattle one time, and I said, that's not very good hay. And the man told me, said that it'll beat a snowball. Right now, they don't get anything, but it needs to be increased. It needs to be increased, but the key was there at $25. Currently, what they did last year would total $28,000 for the state expense.
So
That could fluctuate. But if you could, if you're familiar with it, tell what these people, when they're called up, sometimes for what instances and what they do.
So the State Defense Force, like I said, they volunteered over 1,100 days last year, and they do respond. When the hurricanes hit South Georgia, they were the first ones down there with the Department of Natural Resource game wardens clearing the roads. They've done a lot of debris cleanup. We just had people here from trying to get a national cemetery in Augusta. When they do Memorial Day and 4th of July at the National Cemetery in my district, they're out there directing traffic, helping make sure people get in and out. They're volunteering all across. With COVID, they were going into the nursing homes cleaning. So when you saw the news and they were showing the people in the Army uniforms, they were out, a lot of them, some were National Guard, but a lot were State Defense Force as well, out there exposing themselves, cleaning the nursing homes. They're, anytime you see the Guard on the news, they're responding to an emergency, they're probably there as well.
Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. They say great minds think alike. So I'll ask my question differently. What's the size of this force?
It's about 800 people.
About 800?
Yes, sir.
And this per diem will also cover when they do training, I presume.
So it's when they're activated. So like their routine trainings and things like that, it's not being covered. In the definitions on lines 11 through 18, I worked with Chairman Bonner, making sure that when they are going out getting activated is when they're getting paid. Their routine stuff, that it's not covering that.
So Mr. Chairman, that's a concern because these are Georgians taking care, and so when they're responding to these disasters, we expect for them to be trained and so per diem, just like National Guard or like I was active duty, you got per diem when you're in operations, exercise, and training. Why don't we do the same for this force?
The thought process for that was that they are volunteering, that, volunteering is a sacrifice. So being out there and getting prepped and getting ready, that's just their sacrifice they're making. But when they're actually getting deployed, that's when we're taking care of them, when they're getting activated.
Chairman Saines.
So let me get I popped up one new question before my original one, because I read the definition and it says such term shall also mean when members of the notwithstanding any provision. So is the term eligible service not enough for the per diem?
So the eligible service is the intention it was written, and I see what you're talking about here, and it was for when they're activated. It's lines 16, 17, and 18. When they're activated or called the special duty is when the intention of paying them was. So if we need to clear up the definitions or modify it so even when they're in their training, whatever the will of the committee is, the more we can take care of these people, I'm all on board.
If I'm reading it correctly, I have no issue with it, and I'm going to look for a facial expression from our legislative council. But if reading correctly, it does include drills equivalent in training right now for the per diem rate, because it's inclusionary language on line 15 and 16, adding when it's activated instead of just separating out.
I see that. I think when we were going through the draft, something.
I
but that was not
I think you made an intentional non-mistake there.
a good error.
You were insightful to the will of the committee, from what it sounds like. But in terms of the $25, I know a lot of attention has been given there, and I think a lot of us probably see that as a low amount for per diem in terms of if we're looking to actually compensate staff. But it does say on line 35, not less than, so it's not limiting language there. Who would be empowered to make that decision? Since I think good intent. I don't want to add a fiscal note to your bill if you feel like this is the most passable in terms of the entire process. Who would make that decision of who the compensation level?
From my understanding, it would be the executive branch. Who in there, I'm not 100% sure, but it would fall under the executive branch if they wanted to raise it.
All right, thank you.
This is a hearing only. Yep. All right, Representative McCollum.
I had one question. So when they do get activated, do they drive their personal own vehicle?
Yes, they do.
Go ahead.
They use their own vehicles. They use their cell phones, personal radios. They do not get issued radios. Sometimes they get radios, but most of the time they're having to use their own radios, or they're having to go buy radio equipment. They're having to bring their own laptops. None of that's being provided.
So if they drive from North Georgia to South Georgia to activate, I guess it would be possible we could actually pay a mileage instead of this 25 plus mileage, because that way, that's a big difference. If you go from here to the Florida line, there's no way that'll pay for gas if they're driving their personal vehicles. So if you added mileage, then you just cover them for at least for the fuel and wear and tear on their vehicle, right?
Yes, sir. That is an option. The intent was to be as simple and have as little administrative burden as possible. But it is, it's the will of the committee, and whatever y'all feel like we should do, I'm all open to. So it's just, but the intent was to keep it as little administrative burden. So giving them per diem, short, to the point. Second question, Mr. Chairman. Let me follow up.
Sure.
So who's responsible for, say for instance, if we did the $25 or per diem, who does the physical? Who pays them?
It would fall under the National Guard because they are a department of the National Guard.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
16, is that you, Representative Thompson? Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, I don't expect you to be an expert on this by any means, but is that any of that mileage tax deductible? I mean, are they able to write all that off? Or are they just straight up paying this out of their pocket completely?
Straight out of their pocket, from my understanding.
Wow. Thank you. That's it.
Representative Cannon, is that you?
Yes. Thank you, Chairman Bonner. Have you spoken with the Guard about this, and are they on board with it?
I've spoken with the Guard. I've spoken with Joe Ferrero, their legislative liaison. This did not fall under their priorities for the year. So he said because of that, they're taking a neutral position. So that's his public statement on it. He's taking a neutral position because this has fallen outside their legislative priorities for the year.
All right. Representative Bell.
Great bill, Representative Ridley. My question is more so about the executive branch who can make the over $25 payment. Maybe there might need to be a possibility of maxing it out, put a maximum limit to cut down possibly on abuse for those who say, well, since I'm in the executive branch, this may be my friend. They did such a great job. Here's $1,000. Just so there will be a clear cut maximum, a minimum, just to cut down on abuse or favoritism.
Absolutely.
All right. I don't see any other questions or comments. Just for the committees, just to add some perspective, the Defense Force is a all volunteer force, right? We currently have over 15,000 members of the Georgia Guard and Georgia Air Guard, and we have a number of positions that are available within those ranks that are not filled, and those are paid every time they activate, every time they train. So the Defense Force does provide a valuable service to the state, but they do so in a volunteer capacity. So just something to kind of keep in mind. In that, we do have, there are a number of other volunteer kind of auxiliary type organizations that throughout the state that fall kind of in that same category of volunteer service. So just kind of keep that in mind and just provide some perspective. We do look forward to kind of continuing this conversation with the author of the bill. And if there's no other questions, we'll end this portion of the committee meeting. Thank you, Representative. We appreciate that. Is there any other business to be brought forward to the committee? All right, hearing none. Again, I appreciate y'all's attendance today, and we'll call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.